All right, let's take you now live to our makeshift studio in the Sandton Convention Center. Tuduzile Ramela is our colleague there. Tuduzile, good morning to you. And it is the last day of conference. Important to note that the discussions, key among them, is the expansion of the BRICS bloc. It will likely be called BRICS Plus after this summit. But still, questions remain about whether or not this grouping will be manageable as it expands when, in actual fact, it doesn't have a secretariat which is actually going to run the day-to-day responsibilities of such a grouping. Is that something that should worry the leaders as they get closer to making these announcements about what the declarations of this summit are going to be?
Absolutely, Colin Gambia. Very good morning to you and to our viewers on this 24th day of August. And before we take a look at all of that, I think we need to ask ourselves if there is consensus among the members of BRICS on expanding, because as we understand it, China is for expansion, Russia is for expansion, South Africa has supported expansion. When it comes to Brazil and India, well, we'll, I guess, hear from the declarations that will be made at the end of this summit on whether there is consensus on expanding the bloc. So as we understand that some countries have their own concerns. So at the moment, what we are standing by for is a press briefing by the chair of the BRICS summit this year, and that is President Cyril Ramaphosa. He's going to be having a Q&A with a number of journalists. As we understand it, over 1,000 journalists from all over the world are represented here at the 15th BRICS summit at the Sandton Convention Center. But before that gets underway, Oli, let's try and attempt to answer some of those questions, especially when you speak of expansion, you speak of consensus, and you speak of a secretariat or a lack thereof. And in terms of running the day-to-day affairs of this big organization, for that conversation, we're joined by Mwele Zimbeki, a political analyst and chairman of the South African Institute on International Affairs. A very good morning to you once again, and thank you very much for joining us.
Morning.
My colleague Colin Gambi is asking the question of expansion. It's likely to be called BRICS Plus. But one, is there consensus? Two, it hardly has a secretariat. And is there capacity for this organization to grow?
Well, yes, I think the big part of the global south, the big countries in the global south, want to become members of BRICS. So I don't think the 5 present members of BRICS can stop that from happening. They have to open up the club to the other countries that want to join. Big countries like Egypt, Algeria, Indonesia. So I don't think they have a choice. There's too much pressure from the global south for BRICS to become more representative of the global south and include more member countries from the global south. Now, the how to do it, I think, is a technicality. It's not a principal issue. So I think there will be a strong announcement about where BRICS is going to in terms of incorporating new members. They might set up a secretariat and they might set up a criterion for appointing, for qualifying for membership. But I think it's a foregone conclusion that BRICS is going to expand. That's the demand of the global south, and it will happen.
We spoke about the border dispute between China and India. There are murmurs that India is not quite sure, especially when we speak about consensus, of opening up the bloc. And some of the issues have got to do with the two countries within themselves. Perhaps we can look at the dynamics, right, of this bloc when you take a look at China and India, for instance.
Yes, this is a big issue within BRICS. The lack of an agreed border in the Himalayas, and that's a long border. It's nearly 3,000 kilometers. So the lack of agreement between India and China about the border, that is something that has to be resolved. And it has other ramifications. For example, India India has become closer to the Western powers as a result of, I think, as a result of its disputes with China. So it's driving India into the arms of the West. And this is obviously for the BRICS group, which sees itself as more non-aligned, certainly vis-à-vis the West. This is a problem. But for India, given the threat, China is a much bigger military power than India. So India has to turn to the West for help in its border dispute with China. So India is a member of something called the Quadrilateral Security Dialogue. It's a bit of a mouthful.
Absolutely.
But it's called Quad for short. Now, they call it a security dialogue, but it looks like an alliance to a layman like me. It looks close to a military alliance. Now, this Quad includes India, United States, Japan, and Australia. Now, these are, somebody described it as the Asian NATO, this quadrilateral security dialogue, although they've denied it. So the implications of this border dispute between China is very broad, and it's affecting India's security challenges, and India is turning more and more to the Western countries. For example, for military equipment, it's turning to the United States, it's turning to France. Traditionally, India has been armed by Russia, but Russia and China have become much closer as a result of the war in Ukraine. So India appears to be backing off from its relationship with Russia. So it's a complicated situation for us.
It sounds like it would pose a threat to the formation being BRICS.
Well, it poses a huge dilemma, let me put it that way. But fortunately, it really just affects these two countries. It's not a broader issue.
You spoke of non-alignment, and yesterday the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin, via video link thanked the BRICS member countries for helping end the war between Russia and Ukraine. And then you listen to what the president of Brazil, Lula da Silva, had to say yesterday. His was a rather stern and straightforward speech. Does it appear to you that Brazil is non-aligned?
Well, Well, Brazil says it's non-aligned, so we have to accept that's how it sees itself. But remember, the president of Brazil before Lula, who came in, Lula has, as you know, has had one term, and then there was a break, and then he's back. But Bolsonaro, who was the president before, was very close, not just to the United States, but to Donald Trump, to the Republican Party faction. So I think Lula, of course, has always been associated with left-wing politics, the left wing in Latin America. He's a well-known trade union organizer, so he's part of the left. So I'm not surprised that he sees non-alignment as too weak a posture. He wants a stronger posture.
Okay, let's take a look at some of the declarations from last year's summit in 2022. And there's strengthening and reforming global governance. And then it speaks of being based on inclusive consultation and collaboration for the benefit of all, while respecting sovereign independence, equality, mutual legitimate interests and concerns to make the multilateral organizations more responsive, effective, transparent and credible. How would you rate, or what has been your assessment of how far the bloc has come when it comes to being more inclusive, consultation and collaboration for the benefit of all?
Well, I think there's more of a consensus in BRICS now than I think has been before. this particular summit has compelled the BRIC member countries to take stronger positions. I suspect one of the drivers of that, of course, has been the war in Ukraine and the sanctions against Russia by the Western powers and the arming of Ukraine against the Russian Federation. So it has compelled the members of BRIC to become more articulate about their position of what world order they want to see. So, and surprisingly, I think there's a bigger consensus, given, of course, the China-India issue. But generally, I think there's a bigger consensus within the BRICS member countries about how they see the new world order, what it should look like. They are certainly against domination by the Western powers.
Absolutely. Let's expand on that theme, because they also note in some of the declarations that we appreciate the role of India and Brazil as members of the UN Security Council for 2021-2022 and 2022-2023 respectively. The presence of 4 BRICS countries in the UN Security Council provides an opportunity to further enhance the weight of our dialogue on issues of international peace and security, and for continued cooperation in areas of mutual interest, including through regular exchanges among our permanent mission to the United Nations and in other international fora. You've got 4 BRICS member countries that are represented in the United Nations Security Council. South Africa's President, Cyril Ramaphosa, is semi-consistent with bemoaning the fact that we do not have permanent representation when it comes to any country on the African continent on the United Nations Security Council, given that a majority of the issues that they deal with have to do with conflict on the continent. How should we understand this?
Well, for South Africa and for Africa generally, the issue of Security Council, I think, is very important for reasons that you say, that a great deal of the time of the UN Security Council is devoted to instability in Africa. Given that Africa is very unstable, and a lot of the military interventions, the peacekeeping forces of the United Nations, which of course are decided by the Security Council, are devoted to African problems. And now we're having the reappearance of military coup d'etats in Africa, which we all thought was a thing of the past. And these military coup d'etats trigger lots of conflicts, domestic conflicts and conflicts between neighbors, conflicts within regions. So Africa is right to say it should be represented in a more permanent way in the Security Council, because the Security Council, at the end of the day, plays a very big role in the peace and security in Africa. Absolutely. Compared to other continents.